Welcome back to another episode of Tuesday Tunes with the SBSO. My name is Don Belcher. In addition to being your host, I am also the librarian with the Saginaw Bay Symphony Orchestra. I am delighted to bring you another little piece of this wonderful organization's musical history. Although the orchestra in Saginaw saw many successes and wonderful achievements under the direction of Maestro Czerniawski in the 1950s, one issue seemed to continue to pop up again and again. Unfortunately, this issue is not unique to that era and has continued to affect the orchestra through decades and even still today. This is the issue of funding. The Saginaw Bay Symphony Orchestra operates as a nonprofit organization because we provide a public benefit and further a social cause. This also means that all of the revenue produced is channeled back into the orchestra itself, maintaining and covering the cost of operating without profiting individuals. The nature of nonprofits' inherent dedication to exist as a public service can create lapses in funding, as most of those funds come from grants and donations. This, however, has not always been the case. In the beginning, through most of the 1950s, the orchestra was a civic orchestra and received funding from the local city government as a portion of people's taxes. By the end of the decade, this was no longer. City aid was ruled illegal and public funding completely stopped. This transition from a public entity to a private nonprofit, and thereby the created shortages in revenue, will be the focus on this Tuesday Tunes as we discuss the funding crisis, both then and today. It became quite apparent in the early 1950s that the orchestra was simply not an organization that could be funded solely by providing the city of Saginaw with a musical service, but that it must operate as a business, taking care of its own finances in a manner that any other institution would. By 1952, rumors of a cut in public funding were already circulating, and Czerniawski was working on a plan to encourage donations and further support by appealing to concertgoers. Initially, this was not an outright ask for donations. The first attempt was to craft the idea of becoming a season ticket holder by purchasing all your tickets for the season in one go, assuring the attendance numbers in advance and maintaining the appropriate amount of attendees to cover the cost of concerts themselves. Czerniawski did this in two ways. Firstly, by creating an ambassador program called Friends of Music that encouraged the community to become more involved and upheld the mission to make your life and the life of your children more musical. The second was by titling the 18th season of 1952 and 1953 as Let's Face the Music, with several pamphlets and advertisements around the theme of continuing support and involvement in the symphony. In a newsletter, he even went as far as to compare the importance of the symphony to that of a place of worship, a school for our children, a hospital for our sick, and called music a spiritual necessity. As the debate over where funds should come from continued on and the pressure from the impending loss of civic funding increased, the symphony came up with myriad of solutions to adapt. One of these solutions was to limit expenses by opening the doors to allow the inclusion of talented amateur musicians. These musicians would not be part of a union and would therefore perform at a smaller cost to the symphony than a professional or semi-professional would. This is an important debate, as earlier in the season, rehearsals were suspended as musicians boycotted working for the symphony due to a decrease in wages. Unfortunately, this is a predictable effect of a lack of compensation. If an orchestra cannot pay their musicians an appropriate and competitive wage, then they are unlikely to continue to perform for said orchestra. Although amateur musicians may be talented, allowing less experienced artists to perform would affect the quality of the concerts. The newspaper articles about this topic provided both arguments. On the first, the City Council was quick to point out that the symphony had extended its civic reach by bringing in a number of guest artists from around the world, and that it had moved beyond the realm of local and volunteer limitations under the aggressive direction and expansion of the present conductor. To many, this meant that public funding should no longer go to support the symphony, and that it should learn to stand on its own through ticket sales and membership fees. Amateur musicians, would only decrease the professional value of the symphony and inhibit private expansion of funding. On the other side of the argument, by bringing in amateurs to perform, this would increase the civic aspect of the title by allowing locals a greater chance to work with the symphony and get more involved. This would in turn give more merit to the continued use of public funds, and many in the People's Forum section of our newspaper went on to argue that the caliber of the symphony was still there even without professionals. One commentator stated on the importance of an institution of music to the community by saying that the Saginaw Symphony has achieved remarkable progress and is doing much for the intellectual and cultural life of the Saginaw Valley. One commentator stated on the importance of an institution of music to the community by saying that the Saginaw Symphony has achieved remarkable progress and is doing much for the intellectual and cultural life of the entire Saginaw Valley area. Following the fifth concert of the season, the newspapers reported on the event, giving the article's title, "Finest Performance Ever." That was Saginaw Symphony. Clearly, at least from a purely musical standpoint, the orchestra was doing better than ever. And for the remainder of the 52-53 season, this heated debate over funding raged on without a clear solution or answer. In our next episode of Tuesday Tunes, we will continue this exploration of the 1950s funding crisis and how the orchestra worked to overcome these financial issues to continue to survive and provide the local community with the music it loves.